Beneath the blood eclipse, where the moon bled crimson into the endless night, a single rose petal froze mid-fall, defying the wind's cruel whisper. Ilara's breath fogged the air like a ghost's sigh, her bare feet sinking into the snow-dusted path that wound away from the pack's shadowed stronghold. The northern winds howled through the jagged pines, carrying the distant weevos of wolves who had once called her kin. Now, they echoed as accusations, sharp as thorns against her skin. She was no longer Ilara of the Silverfang, the Omega whose quiet strength had woven the pack's fragile peace. She was nothing, a bride bartered to shadows, promised to the Vampire King in a pact sealed with blood and desperation. The elders had gathered under the torchlight 2 nights past, their eyes gleaming like polished steel in the great hall's chill. The blood moon rises, the High Seer had intoned, her voice a rasp against the crackling fire. It demands tribute. The vampires hunger, and our borders bleed from their raids. You, Ilara, with your unmarked spirit, will bind us to King Draven. Your union will quench their thirst for war. No choice was offered, only the weight of duty crushing her ribs like iron bands. Her alpha, Thorn, the one whose gaze had lingered too long on her in stolen moments, had stood silent, his jaw clenched, guilt etching lines into his noble face. He was the pack's king, marked by the scars of battles won and oaths broken. Yet he bowed to the council's decree. Or so she believed. Rejection came not in words, but in the shove at dawn, when the guards escorted her to the forest's edge. "Go," one growled, his breath hot with ale and disdain. "The Eclipse will claim you if the vampires don't." They stripped her of her furs, leaving only the thin shift that clung to her like a second skin. And the amulet, her mother's legacy, a blood-red ruby pendant pulsing faintly against her chest, as if alive with the heartbeat of forgotten moons. It was no mere jewel. Legends whispered it held the essence of the goddess's tear, shed during the first blood eclipse when lovers were torn asunder by rival thrones. Ilara clutched it now, the stone warm against the invading cold. A solitary anchor in the exile that stretched before her like an uncharted grave. The path descended into the valley, where mist clung to the earth like morning veils. Snowflakes danced erratically, stinging her cheeks, each one a tiny blade reminding her of the warmth she had lost. The pack's fires, once her hearth, now flickered distant on the ridge above, mocking her descent. Her body ached from the hurried march, muscles protesting the weight of betrayal. But it was the heart's wound that bled deepest, a slow seep of sorrow, mingling with the metallic tang of fear on her tongue. Why her? An Omega, untrained in the arts of seduction or survival, gifted only with an intuition that bordered on the divine, a whisper from the lunar spirits that guided lost souls home. The pack had dismissed it as whimsy, but in the quiet hours, it had been her secret fire, warming the edges of her isolation. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised purples, Ilara paused at a frozen stream, its surface a mirror cracked by the encroaching dusk. She knelt, dipping trembling fingers into the icy water, watching ripples distort her reflection. Wide silver eyes, framed by raven hair matted with frost, lips chapped and pale. The amulet dangled forward, its ruby catching the fading light, glowing like coagulated blood. "Goddess," she murmured, voice swallowed by the wind. "If this is destiny, let it be swift." No answer came, only the rustle of branches and a low, guttural rumble from the shadows beyond the tree line. She rose, heart pounding in rhythm with the earth's hidden pulse, and pressed onward. The forest thickened, ancient sentinels of pine and fir guarding secrets older than the packs themselves. Weevos pierced the air again, not her packs, but wilder, laced with a primal fury that stirred something deep within her, an instinctive pull toward the unknown. The blood eclipse would crest at midnight, they said, when the veil between worlds thinned and claims could be forged in the moon's scarlet gaze. Draven's emissaries waited at the border stones, cloaked in midnight silk, their eyes hungry voids promising eternity in chains. But as twilight bled into night, a new sound cut through the gale, the snap of twigs, heavy and deliberate, not the stealth of vampires, but the thunder of pursuit. Ilara froze, the amulet burning hotter against her skin, as if warning of the storm about to break. Footsteps crunched the snow behind her, close, too close. She whirled, breath catching, to face the silhouette emerging from the gloom. Tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in a mantle torn by thorns and time. His eyes, golden as forge fire, locked onto hers, and in that instant, the world narrowed to the space between them, charged with the scent of pine, blood, and unspoken redemption. The wind howled louder, carrying the first crimson hues of the eclipse across the moon's face, and Ilara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the marrow, that her exile was far from ended. It was only the beginning of a claim that would shatter thrones and awaken the goddess's fury. The stranger's cloak billowed like a raven's wing caught in the gale, tattered edges whispering secrets of battles long scarred into the earth. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning the wind's lament as he stepped fully into the crimson moonlight. Not a vampire. His scent was earth and storm, wild musk laced with the iron tang of fresh blood, not the cold rot of the undead. An alpha. She knew it in the marrow of her bones, the instinctive pull that Omegas felt like a tether to the moon itself. His face was a map of shadows and firelight memory. High cheekbones etched with exhaustion, a jaw shadowed by stubble, and those eyes, golden, flickering with a torment that mirrored her own hidden fractures. He halted mere paces away, breath ragged. One hand pressed to his side, where dark stain bloomed through the fabric. A wound, deep and deliberate, the work of fangs or claws, not mere thorns. "You," he growled, voice low as distant thunder rolling over frozen peaks, "should not be here." Yet his gaze roamed her form, not with hunger, but a wary recognition, as if the eclipse had drawn him to this forsaken path like a moth to forbidden flame. Ilara's fingers tightened around the ruby amulet, its warmth a defiant pulse against the chill invading her veins. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the snowflakes biting her skin. But beneath it stirred curiosity, a dangerous spark, igniting the embers of her discarded intuition. She backed a step, the frozen ground crunching under her bare heels, sending jolts of numbness up her legs. "Nor should you," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt, laced with the quiet defiance that had always marked her as other. The amulet seemed to hum, a subtle vibration syncing with the alpha's labored breaths, as if the goddess's tear recognized kin in his suffering. Who was he? Not of her pack. His bearing spoke of greater burdens, a kingly stature bowed by invisible chains. The blood eclipse deepened overhead, the moon's disk, now half-shrouded in scarlet, casting their shadows long and twisted across the snow. He winced, staggering forward, and in that moment, the connection snapped taut, an invisible thread woven from shared exile, pulling her toward him despite the scream of self-preservation. Ilara's mind raced. The vampire's border was near, their emissaries surely scenting the air for her promised flesh. And this alpha, wounded and alone, reeked of pursuit, his trail marked by the coppery drip staining the white earth. "They're coming," he murmured, eyes scanning the tree line where branches swayed like accusing fingers. "The leeches. They track me as surely as they hunt you." His words hung heavy, a confession wrapped in gravel, revealing the guilt that haunted his golden stare, the weight of a crown forged in betrayal. Instinct warred with reason. She should flee, leave this intruder to his fate, and hasten to the border stones where Draven's pact awaited. But the amulet burned hotter, its ruby glowing like a beacon in the eclipse's gloom, urging her to see beyond the fear. Curiosity bloomed, fragile as a frost-kissed bloom, drawing her gaze to the scar peeking from his collar, an ancient mark, twisted like lightning across his throat, a remnant of some royal folly. "Why do you bleed for a stranger's path?" she asked, stepping closer despite the wind's howl urging retreat. Her breath mingled with his, warm puffs in the frigid air, carrying the faint salt of tears unshed. The Alpha's lips curved in a bitter half-smile, pain etching deeper lines into his face. "Because the moon demands witnesses," he said, his voice softening to a rumble that vibrated through her chest. "And you carry her light." He reached out, not to touch, but to gesture at the amulet, his fingers hovering as if afraid to profane the sacred. Denial flickered in his eyes. The instinctive bond they shared, raw and unbidden, clashing with the walls of his melancholy duty. He was no mere wanderer. She sensed the throne's shadow upon him, a king marked by the ghosts of choices that had cost him everything. Ilara's heart ached with echoed sorrow, her own rejection a mirror to his unspoken shame. The pack had cast her out for peace. What wars had shattered him? A distant snarl shattered the fragile truce, vampiric, cold, and venomous, echoing from the valley's depths. The Alpha's head snapped up, his body coiling like a spring despite the wound. "Run with me," he urged, extending a hand scarred by claw and flame. Fear surged anew, but so did the pull, instinctive and undeniable, born not of desire, but of survival's cruel poetry. Ilara hesitated, the amulet's glow pulsing in time with her racing heart, then clasped his hand, rough, warm, a lifeline in the storm. They bolted into the thickening woods, snow kicking up in their wake, the Eclipse's bloodied gaze following like a judgmental eye. Branches clawed at their skin, drawing thin lines of red that mingled with his deeper flow, the metallic scent binding them in visceral kinship. They didn't speak, words lost to the rhythm of flight, but in the shared glances, his golden resolve meeting her silver resolve, curiosity deepened into something perilously like trust. The vampire's howls grew closer, shadows flitting at the periphery, pale forms gliding through the mist like wraiths. Ilara's lungs burned, each step a defiance of her exile, yet the Alpha's presence anchored her, his guilt a silent vow that he would not let her fall alone. They crested a ridge, tumbling into a shallow cave mouth veiled by icicles like frozen teeth. He pulled her inside, the darkness enveloping them as he barred the entrance with a fallen boulder, his breaths heaving. The amulet cast a faint ruby light, illuminating his face, melancholy etched in every line, a king adrift in his own redemption. Empathy stirred in Ilara's chest, warm against the cave's damp chill, transforming fear into a tentative bond. Outside, the wind wailed, carrying the vampire's frustrated snarls, but within, silence reigned, broken only by the drip of melting ice and the slow thaw of guarded hearts. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's breath was a damp shroud, heavy with the scent of moss and ancient stone, as Ilara pressed her back against the rough wall, her chest heaving in the ruby-tinted gloom cast by the amulet. The Alpha, Kyle, he had whispered in the frantic dash, his name a gravelly oath against the wind, slumped beside her, his golden eyes scanning the shadowed entrance with the vigilance of a sentinel guarding ruins. Blood seeped steadily from his side, staining the cave floor in dark petals that mirrored the frozen rose of her exile's beginning. Outside, the vampire's snarls clawed at the night, their hisses slithering through the icicle-veiled mouth like venomous serpents testing the barrier. The blood eclipse hung swollen above, its crimson veil pulsing like a wound in the sky, urging the undead closer with promises of feast and fury. Ilara's fingers trembled as she tore a strip from her shift, the fabric whispering against her skin like a lover's regret. "Let me," she murmured, kneeling before him, the amulet swinging forward to brush his arm. Its warmth seeped into him, a subtle fire against the chill of his injury, and Kale's breath hitched, not from pain, but from the intimacy of her nearness, her silver eyes reflecting the moon's bleed. He should have pulled away. Duty demanded solitude in his shame, the ghosts of his fallen pack howling louder than any vampire. Yet he remained still, allowing her touch, rationalizing it as necessity in this shared peril. "It's nothing," he lied, voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone. But his body betrayed him, leaning into the pressure of her makeshift bandage, as if her hands were the only anchor against the tide of his guilt. The wind outside whipped into a frenzy, carrying the snap of branches under pale, gliding forms. One vampire, tall, emaciated, with eyes like polished obsidian, lunged at the boulder Kale had rolled into place, its claws screeching against rock, sparks flying like dying stars. Ilara flinched, her heart a wild drum echoing the distant weavos of wolves long lost, but Kale's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with a firmness born of protection, not possession. "They sense the Eclipse's power in you," he said, his thumb tracing an unconscious circle on her skin. A spark of connection that sent warmth blooming through her veins, despite the fear coiling in her gut. The ruby. It's no trinket. It calls to them like blood to fangs. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken knowledge, his melancholic gaze flickering to the pendant where it rested against her collarbone, glowing brighter now, as if feeding on their proximity. She bound the wound tighter, ignoring the sting of cold air on her exposed flesh, her mind a whirlwind of resisted truths. This alpha was no savior. He was a fugitive king. She sensed it in the weight of his silence, the way his shoulders bore the invisible crown of betrayals past. Her pack had traded her for peace, but what throne had he forsaken? Empathy stirred unbidden. A tender ache amid the terror, as she recalled the elder's cold decree, the silence of her own alpha who had let her go. "And you?" she asked, voice soft as falling snow, tying off the cloth with fingers that lingered a moment too long. "What calls you to this madness? A king's flight is no idle wander." The question pierced him, drawing a shadow across his face. His ethical core warring with the confession, bubbling like blood from a fresh cut. Kale's jaw tightened, golden eyes darkening to molten regret under the amulet's light. "I was Ragnarok's heir," he admitted, the words tasting of ash and oath. "My pack allied with the vampires once for power against rival clans. But Draven's hunger turned on us. Raids in the night. My kin drained like wine from chalices. I broke the pact, spilled royal blood to end it, and now they hunt me as the traitor who doomed the alliance." Guilt etched deeper, a scar mirroring the ancient one at his throat, twisted like the roots of a forsaken world tree. He had chosen mercy over conquest, freeing thralls at the cost of his throne, yet the duty lingered, a chain heavier than any vampire's bite. Ilara's intuition whispered then, the lunar gift stirring like a hidden flame, the goddess's tear in the ruby recognizing his wound as kin to her own rejection. Not pity, but understanding bloomed, fragile and fierce, binding them in the cave's dim sanctuary. A sharper hiss echoed, the boulder shuddering as multiple claws assailed it, flakes of stone raining down like tears from the eclipse. Kale rose, drawing a jagged dagger from his boot, its blade etched with lunar runes, humming faintly in the ruby's glow. "Stay back," he commanded, positioning himself between her and the entrance, his body a shield forged in fire and frost. Ilara nodded, but her hand found his free one, squeezing with a resolve that surprised them both. The bond deepened in that touch, empathy weaving through fear like roots through frozen soil, transforming strangers into allies against the night. She felt it viscerally. The heat of his palm against her cold fingers, the shared rhythm of breaths syncing with the drip of melting ice, the metallic tang of his blood mingling with the cave's earthy musk. The assault intensified, the vampire's forms blurring in the crimson moonlight filtering through cracks, pale limbs clawing, fangs glinting like shattered ice. Kyle slashed at a probing arm that snaked through a fissure, severing it with a wet crunch, black ichor splattering the stone. The creature's shriek pierced the air, a sound of eternal hunger denied. But more came, their numbers swelling under the moon's bloody command. Ilara's gift surged then, unbidden, a vision flashing in her mind, paths through the mountain veins, hidden tunnels veined with quartz that gleamed like the goddess's veins. "This way!" she gasped, pulling him toward the rear wall where her intuition revealed a concealed crevice, narrow and veiled by lichen. He followed without question, their hands linked, ducking into the passage as the boulder finally gave way behind them with a thunderous groan. The tunnel wound downward, the air growing thicker, warmer, laced with the faint sulfur of underground springs. Vampiric howls faded to muffled echoes, the Eclipse's light replaced by the amulet's steady pulse, guiding them like a crimson star. Exhaustion clawed at Ilara's limbs, but the bond held firm, his guilt a mirror to her sorrow, her quiet strength a balm to his fractured duty. In the dim glow, Cale glanced back, his eyes meeting hers with a vulnerability that cracked his kingly facade. "You see paths others cannot," he murmured, awe threading his voice like silver in shadow. "The moon chose you for more than sacrifice." Denial flickered in her heart. Love was no reward, only a trial amid the pain. But the warmth of his presence resisted the cold, rationalizing survival as something deeper, a tentative vow forged in refuge's fire. They emerged into a larger chamber where a natural hot spring steamed against the stone, its waters shimmering under the ruby's light like liquid moonlight. Ilara sank to the edge, the steam curling around her like a lover's sigh, while Cale kindled a small fire from damp tinder with flint and will, flames dancing to life and casting golden flickers across his weary face. The vampire's pursuit lingered in the distance, a shadow on their fragile peace. But here, in this hidden heart of the mountain, empathy solidified into bond, a quiet promise that neither would face the dawn alone. Yet doubt gnawed at her. Was this connection destiny's revelation, or merely the Eclipse's cruel illusion, binding the broken only to test their resolve? The fire crackled, blood and steam mingling in the air, and Ilara wondered, in the silence broken only by the spring's gentle lap, what strength lay in choosing trust over the throne of isolation. Steam rose from the hot spring like the breath of slumbering gods, curling around Ilara's weary form as she perched on the chamber's edge, the ruby's glow weaving crimson threads through the mist. The fire Cale had coaxed to life spat and hissed, its flames licking at the damp stone, casting elongated shadows that danced like restless spirits across the walls. The air hummed with the earth's hidden pulse, sulfur-tinged warmth clashing with the metallic whisper of his drying blood, a scent that clung to her skin like an unwelcome vow. Outside, the blood eclipse lingered in its zenith, the moon's scarlet shroud filtering through unseen fissures above, painting the water in hues of congealed wine. Ilara's body ached from the flight, muscles knotted with the cold's lingering bite, but it was the stirrings within her that unsettled most, a deepening intuition, sharp as a thorn beneath her breastbone, urging her toward truth she dared not name. Cale knelt by the fire, his broad shoulders bowed under the weight of his confession, golden eyes fixed on the flames as if they held answers to the betrayals that had unmade him. The bandage she had fashioned held, but fresh crimson seeped at the edges, a reminder of the vampire's relentless hunger and his own fractured honor. He poked at the embers with a charred stick, sparks ascending like fleeting prayers, his silence a heavy mantle that pressed upon her. Empathy had woven them closer in the tunnel's gloom, her touch on his hand a bridge over the chasm of their pains, yet denial lingered in her heart. This bond was no balm, only a trial forged in the Eclipse's fire, testing if rejection could birth something unbreakable. She watched him, the ancient scar at his throat catching the firelight, twisted like the roots of a world tree rent by lightning, and wondered at the kingly sorrow that etched his features, so akin to her own quiet exile. The amulet pulsed warmer against her chest, its ruby heart sinking with the spring's gentle lap, as if awakening to the chamber's latent power. Ilara's gift had always been a whisper, visions of paths unseen, guidance from the lunar veil that the pack had scorned as Omega folly. But here, in this womb of stone and steam, it surged like a tide, unbidden and fierce. Her vision blurred, the fire's glow expanding into fractals of light, revealing not just flames, but threads of fate. Silver strands weaving from the ruby to Kale's wound, pulsing with the moon's crimson rhythm. She gasped, fingers clutching the pendant, its heat flooding her veins like liquid fire, chasing away the numbness of her bare limbs. Images cascaded, Draven's throne of bone and shadow, vampires swarming the packlands under the Eclipse's command, and Kale's fallen kin rising as spectral allies if the pact were severed not by blade, but by a tear of the goddess reclaimed. "What is it?" Kyle's voice cut through the haze, low and urgent, his hand reaching to steady her as she swayed. His touch grounded her, rough palm against her arm, sending a jolt of warmth that mingled fear with an instinctive pull. He leaned closer, the scent of pine and blood enveloping her, his golden eyes widening as the ruby's light intensified, bathing his face in ethereal red. Ilara's breath came in shallow bursts, the vision clarifying. She was no mere sacrifice. The amulet was the key, its essence a fragment of the goddess's sorrow from the first blood eclipse, when lovers' claims had shattered realms. It could unmake Draven's hunger, revealing hidden paths to shatter the alliance without war, paths only a Pathfinder Omega could tread, her rejected spirit the vessel for lunar redemption. Tears welled in her silver eyes, hot against the steam's caress as the weight of it settled. Suffering had honed her, exile stripping away illusions, leaving only this divine spark. The ruby. "It's alive," she whispered, voice trembling like wind through icicles, her free hand tracing the air where the threads shimmered, invisible to him yet. "It shows me. The vampire's weakness lies not in battle, but in the moon's tear. I can guide us, Kale. Through veins of the earth to their heart, to break the pact with light, not blood." The words spilled forth, raw and revelatory, her body quaking with the gift's manifestation, a rebirth amid the pain that clawed her chest. Doubt warred within. Was this power a curse, binding her deeper to this alpha's fate, or the goddess's proof that rejection forged destiny's blade? Kale's breath stilled, his grip tightening as realization dawned in his eyes, the melancholy king beholding the key to his shattered world. He had fled his throne for mercy's sake, choosing compassion over power, only to wander in guilt's shadow. Yet here she stood, the Omega whose quiet fire mirrored his ethical wound. The amulet's glow reflected in his gaze, turning gold to molten awe. As the vision's echoes touched him through their bond, faint glimpses of paths unfolding, his pack's ghosts whispering approval. "You are the revelation," he murmured, voice thick with wonder and the ache of long-denied hope, his thumb brushing her cheek, wiping away a tear that sizzled on the stone. "The moon marked you not for chains, but to heal what kings have broken. My betrayal. It led me here, to you, the Pathfinder who sees beyond the eclipse's lie." The chamber seemed to contract, the spring's steam thickening like a veil of secrets unveiled, the fire roaring higher as if fed by their shared awakening. Ilara's heart pounded, visceral and profound, the ruby's pulse echoing her own, blood singing in her ears like distant weavos calling her home. Yet the tenderness born of this moment was laced with tragedy. Love as redemption demanded choice, not ease, and the vampire's distant snarls filtered through the stone, a reminder that destiny's key came sheathed in peril. Kyle's face softened, the guilt in his eyes yielding to a fierce resolve, seeing in her not a fragile Omega, but the spiritual force to crown mercy over fallen thrones. Their hands remained linked, warmth against warmth, as the bond deepened into certainty. She was his path to absolution, and he, perhaps, the strength to wield her gift without shattering. But as the vision faded, leaving echoes of crimson moonlight in her mind, Elara felt the moral dilemma coil tight. To embrace this role meant confronting her pack's betrayal, Draven's shadowed claim, and the freedom she had glimpsed in exile. The amulet cooled slightly, its light steadying like a heartbeat after storm, and she met Kale's gaze, silver meeting gold in the fire's embrace. What was strength, if not choosing to illuminate the dark for one who saw her worth? The eclipse waned above, its bloodied gaze watchful as the chamber held its breath. The air thick with the scent of revelation and the promise of trials yet to come. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The chamber's steam thinned as the eclipse's crimson veil began to fray, threads of silver moonlight piercing the fissures above like hesitant fingers seeking the wounded below. Elara's skin prickled under the shifting light, the ruby's glow dimming to a steady ember against her chest, as if the amulet had expended its fire in revelation only to hoard it for the storm ahead. Kale stood across from her, the hot spring's mist clinging to his cloak like spectral chains, his golden eyes shadowed by the weight of truths unearthed. The fire had dwindled to glowing coals, casting his scarred throat in flickering relief, a map of old betrayals that now demanded reckoning. Distant snarls echoed through the stone, vampires regrouping, their hunger undeterred. But closer still came the rumble of paws on earth, a pack's thunder rolling toward the mountain's heart. Her pack, Thorn's pack. The past clawed its way back, not as memory but as flesh and fury, forcing the confrontation she had fled into exile to escape. Elara's breath caught, the air thickening with the scent of pine and approaching rain, her intuition flaring like a warning ember. Visions splintered in her mind. Thorn's silhouette at the great hall's threshold, his noble face twisted not in guilt, but in calculated resolve. Elders whispering of renewed pacts, Draven's emissaries infiltrating the borders under the blood moon's guise. The ruby pulsed hot, urging her forward, but fear coiled in her gut. Visceral, metallic, tasting of the blood she had spilled in binding Kale's wound. "They're coming," she whispered, voice a fragile thread in the chamber's hush, her silver eyes locking onto his. Kyle nodded, drawing his rune-etched dagger, his body coiling with the ethical tension of a king who had once chosen mercy at throne's cost. Their bond thrummed, a quiet fire amid the encroaching cold, yet it offered no shield against the moral tempest brewing. The tunnel's mouth shuddered as the first howls pierced the stone, Silverfang's call, laced with betrayal's edge. Elara rose, legs unsteady on the damp floor, the spring's warmth a fleeting memory against the chill seeping from the walls. Kyle positioned himself at her side, not before her, his hand brushing hers in silent alliance, the touch a spark of resisted tenderness born from shared pain. They emerged into a wider cavern, veins of quartz gleaming like frozen lightning under the waning eclipse, the air alive with the wind's mournful sigh. Torchlight flickered at the passage's end, carried by figures spilling from the shadows, her former kin, furred cloaks dusted with snow, eyes gleaming with accusation and desperation. At their fore strode Thorn, the pack's alpha, tall, unscarred save for the fresh bite at his shoulder, his gaze a storm of conflicted duty that had once lingered on her in hidden warmth. "Elara?" Thorn growled, his voice echoing off the stone like a judgment from the moon itself, halting his warriors mid-stride. They fanned out, forming a semicircle of steel and snarls, the metallic tang of their blades mingling with the cave's sulphurous breath. The seers foresaw your flight. Draven's rage shakes the borders, the pact frays because of you. His eyes flick to Kale, narrowing to slits of recognition and rivalry. The fugitive king, whose broken alliance had ignited this war of shadows and fangs. Betrayal hung thick, not just in Ilara's exile, but in Thorn's unspoken complicity. He had stood silent at her sentencing, his heart warring with the council's decree, yet yielding to preserve the fragile peace. Now guilt etched his features, a mirror to Kale's melancholy, as vampires' hisses joined the fray from distant tunnels, drawn by the commotion like moths to bloodied flame. Kale stepped forward, dagger raised but steady, his golden stare unyielding. The pact was poison from the start, Thorn. You trade souls for borders while Draven drains the north dry. His words cut deep, a philosophical blade honed by his own fall, power versus compassion, the choice that had cost him his throne. Ilara's heart pounded, the ruby's heat surging as her gift unveiled the threads. Thorn was no mere rival, but the traitor in their midst, his secret parleys with Draven's court sealing her fate for a crown of uneasy alliance. Pain lanced through her, sharp as wind-whipped snow, the rejection's wound reopening to bleed fresh sorrow. She had loved him once, in quiet glances amid the pack's harsh hierarchy, only to be bartered like chattel. Freedom whispered in the Eclipse's fading light. Run, vanish into the mountain's veins, claim the solitude her intuition promised. But love's redemption pulled her back. Kyle's presence, a gravitational force, his ethical wound echoing her own. The cavern trembled as vampires slithered from side passages, pale forms gliding on the quartz's gleam, fangs bared in the crimson remnants of moonlight. Chaos erupted, silver-fang warriors clashing with undead claws, howls mingling with shrieks, blood spraying in arcs that caught the firelight like ruby splinters. Thorn lunged at Kale, their bodies colliding in a frenzy of fur and steel, alpha against alpha, past grievances igniting into visceral war. Ilara dodged a vampire's swipe, its cold breath reeking of rot, her bare feet slipping on slick stone as she clutched the amulet. Visions cascaded, paths to victory through mercy, not slaughter, a hidden rift where lunar light could sever Draven's hold, if forgiveness bridged the pack's divide. But forgiveness? For Thorn's silence? For the Elder's greed? The moral choice tore at her. Love for Kale, a redemptive flame clashing with the freedom of eternal exile. War's roar demanding blood where compassion urged peace. Kale parried Thorn's blow, their grunts echoing like thunder in the confined space, sweat and blood mingling on their skins. "She is no tribute!" Kale roared, his voice laced with the guilt of his own betrayals, golden eyes flashing toward Ilara amid the fray. Thorn hesitated, blade hovering, his face crumpling under the weight of confession. "I bargained with Draven to save us," he admitted, breath ragged. "But it cost her. Cost everything." The admission hung, a pivotal fracture. As a vampire queen, Draven's consort, eyes like voided stars, emerged from the shadows, her laughter a silken venom promising dominion under the blood moon. Ilara's gift ignited fully, the ruby blazing as she traced the air, revealing the rift. A quartz-veined crevice pulsing with the goddess's light, strong enough to banish the undead if united wills channeled it. "Stop!" she cried, voice cutting through the melee like a weevo under full moon, silver eyes fierce with the tragedy of choice. Warriors paused, vampires recoiled from the amulet's flare, and the alphas turned, Thorn's gaze pleading, Kale's resolute. Love or freedom, to forgive Thorn's treason, weaving packs into alliance against Draven's war, or flee with Kale into shadowed liberty, leaving the north to bleed. The wind howled through the cavern, carrying the scent of fire and frost, blood pooling at her feet like offerings to the Eclipse's judge. Her hand found Kale's amid the standoff, warmth against the cold steel of decision, the bond a testament to redemption's price. Forgiveness meant war's end through unity, but at the cost of her heart's scars reopening. Freedom meant love's quiet proof, yet abandonment of kin to darkness. The ruby thrummed, the moon's light strengthening, and Alara wondered, in the heartbeat of confrontation, if true strength lay not in victory's blade, but in the mercy that could heal divided thrones, or shatter them forever. The chamber held its breath, the air thick with the coppery promise of choices etched in blood and moonlight, as destiny demanded her verdict. The cavern's quartz veins pulsed like the arteries of a slumbering beast, channeling the moon's silver resurgence as the eclipse's crimson faded to a bruised twilight. Ilara stood at the rift's threshold, the ruby's blaze a defiant heart against her chest, its light fracturing into prisms that danced across the blood-slicked stone. The air reeked of iron and frost, the wind's howl seeping through cracks like the goddess's own lament, carrying the distant weavos of packs entwined in chaos. Warriors froze mid-strike, their breaths fogging the chill, eyes wide with the amulet's unearthly glow. Vampires recoiled, their pale forms hissing shadows against the gleaming walls. Draven's consort baring fangs in a snarl that echoed eternal night. Thorn and Kale faced her, blades lowered but taut, their golden gazes, rival flames, locked on the Omega whose exile had birthed this precipice. Ilara's pulse thundered, visceral as the blood pooling at her feet, each droplet a petal from the frozen rose of her beginning. The gift surged through her, no longer a whisper, but a torrent, unveiling the rift's power. Lunar essence woven into the earth's core, capable of searing the undead's curse if fueled by unified will. Yet unity demanded sacrifice, the mending of fractured oaths, forgiveness for Thorn's treason that had bartered her soul, and Kale's acceptance of a throne reborn not in conquest, but compassion. Freedom tempted, a shadowed path branching into the mountain's embrace. Where she and Kale could vanish like mist at dawn, their bond a quiet redemption, untainted by pacts and pacts. But love was no reward, only proof amid suffering. To choose exile meant abandoning the north to Draven's famine, her intuition's light dimmed by the weight of unlived destinies. Tears traced hot paths down her cheeks, mingling with the steam from the spring's distant murmur, the metallic tang of blood on her tongue, a reminder of wounds shared and unbound. She met Thorn's eyes first, storm gray, etched with the guilt of silence, the alpha who had loved her in stolen glances, yet yielded to elders' greed for a crown of false peace. "You traded me for borders," she whispered, voice carrying like wind through pines, raw with the tragedy of what might have been. His jaw clenched, the fresh bite at his shoulder weeping crimson, a mark of his secret parleys now exposed. "I thought it mercy," he rasped, stepping forward, his warriors shifting uneasily behind him. "To spare the pack your light in chains. But betrayal hollows the throne." The admission hung, a bridge of sorrow, his ethical fracture mirroring Kale's, two kings scarred by choices that bled the innocent. Kale's hand tightened on hers, rough warmth the anchor in the storm, his golden stare fierce with the melancholy of one who had fled power for pity's sake. The ancient scar at his throat gleamed under the ruby's light, twisted like fate's cruel jest, and she felt his guilt pulse through their bond. The ghosts of his fallen kin urging him toward this union, redemption not in solitude, but in weaving mercy's web. "Choose us," he murmured, low as thunder over snowfields, his breath warm against her ear amid the cavern's chill. "Not for thrones, but for the healing only you can bring." Denial had resisted this pull, rationalized as survival's illusion. Born of fear and curiosity in the cave's refuge, but acceptance bloomed now, tender and tragic, a renascimento forged in the fire of moral trial. Love as redemption demanded her heart's blood, not ease, To heal these wounds meant embracing the pack's shadows, her exile's pain transmuted into the goddess's light. The vampire consort lunged then, a blur of silk and shadow, her voided eyes fixed on the amulet with ravenous hunger. "The tear is ours!" she shrieked, claws extended like frozen thorns, the air splitting with her venomous speed. Ilara's intuition ignited, guiding her hand to the rift, fingers splaying against quartz that hummed like a lover's sigh. The ruby flared, channeling silver fire through the veins, but it faltered, dimming without the unity her vision craved. Thorn moved first, his blade intercepting the consort's strike, steel clanging against claw in a shower of sparks that lit the gloom like falling stars. "For her," he growled, turning to his warriors, who surged forward, not in conquest but alliance, their howls blending with Kale's pack echoes in spectral harmony. Kale joined the fray beside her, dagger flashing to sever a vampire's limb, black ichor spraying like ink on snow, but his eyes never left Ilara's. The choice crystallized in that visceral chaos, the wind whipping through the cavern, carrying the scent of fire and frost, blood singing hymns to the moon's rebirth. Freedom was liberty's cold kiss, but compassion's crown demanded sacrifice, forgiving Thorn's fall to unite the packs, channeling her Pathfinder gift to banish Draven's shadow without slaughter. She stepped into the rift, the stone warm under her palms, the amulet's essence pouring forth like a tear unshed. "Together," she commanded, voice steady as lunar tide, extending her free hand to Thorn while clasping Kale's. Their grips met, gold and gray yielding to silver, and the light erupted, silver flames racing through quartz, searing the vampires in waves of purifying glow. The consort wailed, her form dissolving into ash that swirled like crimson petals on the wind, the undead horde retreating into fissures with shrieks that faded to silence. Draven's pact shattered, the blood eclipse yielding to full moonlight, bathing the cavern in ethereal white. Warriors slumped, exhausted but unbroken, the air clearing of rot to breathe pine and earth once more. Thorn knelt, head bowed, his treason absolved in the act of redemption, the pack's divide mended by Ilara's quiet strength. Kale drew her close, his arms a mantle against the lingering chill, forehead pressing to hers in a union born of trial, not triumph. The bond sealed, resisted no longer, accepted as destiny's proof, his guilt easing like frost under sun, her rejection reborn as the key to northern peace. Yet the tenderness was laced with tragedy. Scars remained, etched in flesh and memory, a reminder that love healed but did not erase the blood spilled. Ilara leaned into him, the ruby's glow softening to a gentle pulse, sinking with their shared heartbeat amid the wind's soft sigh. The moon watched, silver and whole, as the cavern exhaled, the frozen rose of exile thawing into spring's promise. In this Renascimento, strength proved not in power's blade, but mercy's embrace. Every omega born to heal a king's wound, every choice a step toward the goddess's eternal light. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.